Hello, I'm David Dubato, and this is the No Delusion Zone for Saturday, June 27th, 2026. And this is the latest in a series of episodes that I'm doing in the lead up to our 250th anniversary on the 4th of July this summer, which is the 250th anniversary of the signing of our Declaration of Independence from Great Britain, signed in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, me, like tens of millions of other Americans, will not be celebrating this otherwise historic occasion. Why? Because I sincerely believe, as do tens of millions of other Americans, that if the founding fathers knew what the fake traitor patriots, MAGA, has done to this country, especially in the last 18 months, they would vomit. They wouldn't recognize our constitutional republic, also known as our democracy. They just wouldn't get it. They couldn't believe how a series of deranged, delusional individuals could have kidnapped this nation, could have taken over the government that they created, could have perverted the American experiment, the idea and ideals that they created, that they applied to this new nation that came about on the 4th of July in that year, 1776. I believe they'd be pretty upset, to say the least. And the couple of focus points I'm going to make during this episode is one that I think clearly illustrates the problems that we're having. And it has to do with one of my pet peeves, one of my favorite topics, which is Christian nationalism, the perversion, of Christianity. I am not a devout Christian. I was raised as a Roman Catholic. I am not a Roman Catholic. I am not a Christian. If anything, I'm an agnostic. I sometimes call myself an atheist, but I believe there is some higher power, or at least an energy that connects us all. However, I am not a Christian. I am not a Christian nationalist. I hate Christian nationalists because they are masquerading as Christians. They are not. They cherry pick sections from the Bible, primarily the Old Testament, which talks about retribution, the whole eye for an eye thing and all of that, a very vengeful God. But yet they have the nerve to quote Jesus Christ, who, as most of you know, doesn't appear in the Old Testament, only the New Testament, and preaches peace and benevolence and getting along with your neighbors, forgiving sin. He doesn't, as these delusional folks say, and I'm going to play a brief clip about them in a moment. He was not an anti-globalist preacher. He never said anything like that. Or anything that they preach, especially the violence. And anyway, I'm going to, talking about that, I'm going to play a brief selection, a brief clip about these individuals. They just had what they call Freedom Con, that they just celebrated, where thousands of men and boys gathered in central Washington, that's Washington State, for masculinity, Christianity, and right-wing politics. And the headline of this gathering and this article is "Where Testosterone and the Bible Are the New Punk Rock." I actually say that they are the new existential danger to our national security and to our constitutional republic. They're delusional, sick, violent thugs. So let me just get to this clip about this Freedom Con that was held recently in Washington State. Short clip. Take a listen. I'll join you on the other side.
God is the author of nationalism, and God opposes globalism. Globalism today is still the progressive myth that we're all good people, not sinners. If we all work together, we could bring heaven on earth without God. This is the ideology of the progressive left, which is against our God and his word. That's why we should love our nation, because God put us in our nation, and God's the one who sovereignly created the nations. Now, those who would tell you that we need to just work together, have a global economy, have a global military, have a global currency, or heaven forbid, have something like the World Health Organization override all of the various sovereign governments in nations for some sort of, air quote, pandemic, then what we are doing is we are going against our God, who said that globalism was dangerous and nationalism is his will. That nations should be sovereign and they should look for their interests first. And that's why you and I should love God and love our nation, and then with the gospel of Jesus Christ, seek to reach other nations, because the most loving thing we can do is introduce them to our Jesus so that his kingdom comes on their part of the earth as his kingdom comes on our part of the earth.
What a dangerous, delusional son of a bitch. Yeah, we're going to spread the word of Jesus Christ and God, just like the missionaries did in South America and Asia and Africa. After we slaughter the natives in the tens of thousands, just to introduce them to the Prince of Peace. You deranged bastard. And I'm sorry, when again did Jesus preach against globalism and the sovereignty of nations? Again, delusional, but tens of millions of Americans follow this gutless hypocrite. Let me put this up here. This is, again, about this Freedom Con. And I quote from this article, which I think was in the Guardian newspaper. At Freedom Con, there were feats of strength and CrossFit contests. There was an obstacle course and a station for practicing how to change a tire. There was prayer and music and original verse from a pastor and tactical gear salesman known as the Warrior Poet. There were exhortations from the stage to run for office, to have more babies, and to reject woke, secular, gay paganism. In quotes, heterosexual, sober men who marry girls and read Bibles, we're the new punk rock. The pastor, Mark Driscoll, said in a fiery sermon that brought attendees to their feet. I bet it did. Delusional, brainwashed people like to hear that kind of raw meat. They love to have their fear and anger stoked and their delusions talked to by somebody who they believes the same thing they do, which is delusion, which is insanity, and hate your fellow man and woman. If they don't believe what you believe, kill them. You know, and I'm going to play another clip about somebody who believes the same as those delusional, violent freaks do as well. I've showed this before, but I think it bears showing a lot. This is the spiritual advisor to the hypocrite in chief, Donald Trump. This is who he listens to and who he takes advice from in terms of Christian nationalism and which way this nation should go in its spiritual journey.
Strike and 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 strike until you have victory. For every enemy that is aligned against you, let there be that we would strike the ground, for you will give us victory, God. I hear a sound of abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of shouting and singing. I hear a sound of victory. I hear a sound of an abundance of rain. I hear a sound of victory. The Lord says, it is done. For I hear victory, 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 victory in the corridors of heaven. In the corridors of heaven, victory, 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 victory. For angels are being released right now. Angels are being dispatched right now. Hamanda aka ata raka teda baka sanda ada ambo osa kata rite eke banda ada rike didi ashada. For angels have even been dispatched from Africa right now. Africa right now. Africa right now. From Africa right now. They're coming here. They're coming here. In the name of Jesus, from South America, they're coming here. They're coming here. They're coming here. I hear the sound of victory. I hear the sound of victory. I hear the sound.
You know, in a normal world, this woman would be put in an insane asylum and locked away from the rest of us before she could do any danger. She's obviously insane. She is insane, a babbling idiot. Yet she has the ear of the President of the United States, who is himself, of course, a babbling idiot. And although he doesn't believe her because he doesn't believe in anything other than making money for himself, he does listen to her. At least those in his inner circle who are fairly smart but equally delusional do listen to her. Atta, 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 udo, udo, udo. Angels are being dispatched. What a crazy, delusional bitch. And yet, this is Christian nationalism. This is the face and the words of Christian nationalism, folks. The actual religion, the core religion of those who have the most power in the United States of America right now. And if you support them, if you think that they are righteous and we should be believing them, you're insane too. You're delusional. And you're not an American that I want to live with. I'm sorry. If that insults you, so what? These are crazy people. And moving along with the theme of today, which is how crazy and irrational this country has been, I just want to go back a little bit about the fact that even during the 4th of July of 1776, the founders realized that they weren't solving all of the problems that this new nation was going to have to face. Probably, arguably, the most important, dangerous, significant problem they were going to face immediately was slavery. There's no question about it. It was slavery. And there were momentous, fierce debates within the founding fathers, within the first Congress, the Constitutional Convention, but before that, the Colonial Congress, and then the American Congress, about what to do with slavery, to abolish it before they signed the Declaration of Independence, and then later when we formed the nation and had our own constitution. But it was decided just shortly before the 4th of July that they couldn't get the approval of course, the southern states who depended on slavery for their economy. So reluctantly, the rest of the delegates to the Constitutional Congress agreed to, at least temporarily, allow slavery to still be allowed, legal, in the new United States of America. So we did form a new nation as a slave nation, as a racist nation. And some would argue, many would argue, that we are still a racist nation. And the next individual that I want to talk about, and the only other focus for today's podcast, is somebody who writes about this quite often, the going back to the revolution, the founding of our nation, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s. And he, like I said, he talks and writes about that a lot. He is a professor and author, Eddie Glaude. Let me put him up here. Hold on just a moment. And there he is. And I'm just going to read again. I think this is an article that was in the UK journal, The Telegraph, I believe, or I'm not sure. It was definitely in a UK British publication. And Glaude was saying, we're witnessing the end of the America that made our lives possible. Author Eddie Glaude on the U.S.'s 250th birthday. And he just wrote a new book about that. And I apologize. Actually, it was printed in The Guardian. And I'm just going to read some excerpts from his, actually an interview with him that was done again by, I believe, the Guardian. And you can read along with me. You juxtapose past racist violence against Black people with current day violence against them. What do you make of the cyclical nature of race relations in this country, the U.S., in which progress is typically marred by these attacks? I think it's rooted in the chapter, Freedom is the White Man's Gift, which flows out of the divided soul of the nation. I make a claim that America suffers from a kind of double consciousness, that it imagines itself as a beacon of freedom and as a white republic. And you can't hold those two claims together without contradiction or depositing a kind of madness at the heart of the country. Freedom is seen as the possession of a particular group of folk who can give it and take it away. And so when we find ourselves in these moments where we want to live up to our ideals and address racial injustice, we typically do so in a sentimentalized way. What can we do for you? But that charity runs dry, such as at the end of Reconstruction, where people said, we're done with the issue of slavery, but we don't want black folk to have full citizenship rights. Folks who were anti-slavery suddenly were deeply suspicious about extending the franchise to black people. Or we have these other moments where folks are asking the question, what else do you want? We've given you so much, show some gratitude. We find ourselves in these cycles of sentimentality and white rage, as Carol Anderson talks about. So we find ourselves over and over again. We find ourselves over and over again in these moments of backlash and then a desire for absolution. Folks, and I'm going to get a lot of negative comments about this, I'm sure. America is still a racist nation. We were born as a racist nation, as I just said, against the wishes of perhaps the majority of the delegates to our constitutional convention, which signed the Declaration of Independence, who did not want slavery. We did allow slavery. We legalized slavery at the very founding of this nation. We went through a bloody civil war in the 1860s to do away with slavery, and legally we did. But then, as just this author just said, Glaude, then came Reconstruction. That was the period directly after the Civil War, where these new laws, these anti-slavery laws, these new human and civil rights laws were to be enacted, allowing black people to be franchised, to stop them from being disenfranchised in the United States of America, allowing them to vote, stopping the violence and all of the other discrimination that they had been subject to for hundreds of years. Well, that didn't work out. And in many, many parts of the United States, especially in the southern states, it became even more violent. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of lynchings, where black people were often pulled out of their houses or churches and hung with a rope on trees outside of town, all over the South, and sometimes in the Midwest and even occasionally in the North. Then in the 1960s, we passed the Civil Rights Act, and so suddenly, magically, black people were supposed to have the same rights as everyone else. And in theory, by law, they did. We're still having problems. And it all goes back to the fact that on the 4th of July, 1776, for many, many different reasons, and we can argue about that forever, the United States government at the time of our founding allowed slavery to continue. And now these delusional, violent sons of bitches who call themselves Christian nationalists, who are really white supremacists in anything other than name only, want to perpetuate that disgrace, that sin, that plague, which is racism, and keeping this country as a white-only Christian nation. Christian, but only for white Christians. And that's why I and tens of millions of other Americans will not be celebrating, at least not joyously, our 250th anniversary on the 4th of July. And if you want to make comments about what I've just said, or you have comments about your own, I strongly encourage you to leave them. Leave them here in the comments to this podcast on the No Delusion Zone. I, of course, like I always ask, would love for you to like and subscribe to the No Delusion Zone, because if you want to hear more rants like this against Christian nationalism, against racism, against MAGA, Donald Trump, and the violent traitors who now run this country and are very possibly going to put the finishing touches on a fascist government that he is desperately trying to complete, then please subscribe, like and subscribe. Tell your friends, colleagues, and family to subscribe to the No Delusion Zone, and I will hopefully put out many, many more of these. So until next time, you all please, at least you non-MAGA folks, take care, stay safe, and stay sane if possible.